Hi guys, it's me, Chazza HD, and welcome to race number 6 of the 2025 Formula 1 season. And we are here in Vice City, Miami, for another edition of the Miami Grand Prix. Of course, quite a bit has already happened this weekend. We've just come off a sprint race, which was, because of the changing weather conditions, chaotic and a bit mental in certain places. And obviously we had a sprint qualifying yesterday, which does give us a decent indication as to how things are looking this weekend. But yeah, already been eventful so far. And of course, this qualifying session, absolutely crucial, whether it's dry or wet, in determining just how things are going to go for the rest of the weekend. In regards to the sprint race, by the way, guys, I will go into the results of those in a moment. And I will also show the championship standings coming out of the sprint as well, because of course there are a few points on offer in the sprint race, so I'll get into that in a moment. But of course, this is the first of three races in the United States, and this is also the first of, I think, 5 races in total in North America. Obviously, we've got one race in Canada and one race in Mexico, as well as the 3 in America. So, yeah, for the first time, quite a lot this season will be coming to North America. And yeah, this qualifying session should be, after what we saw in sprint qualifying yesterday, should be very close and competitive, and we should get some real good excitement through the field, through all parts of the field. I don't think pole position is an absolutely guaranteed thing for any driver coming into this session, or even any team. It is definitely a bit closer this weekend than I think a lot of us were expecting. So, yeah, looking good for this qualifying session that, as you can see, coming up in an hour and 27 minutes. Of course, the stream was supposed to go live just under 20 minutes ago. But because of the shenanigans of the sprint race and it starting late and then the way it ended, the start of qualifying has been delayed by 15 minutes. That countdown that's on my screen, though, on the screen for you guys, that is the legitimate countdown to when qualifying will legitimately start. So yeah, an hour and 26 minutes until qualifying is underway in Miami. And like I said, it should be a good session. I hope you guys are doing well, by the way. Now we're in the month of May. Of course, I've not chatted to you guys on stream for a couple weeks. And I hope you guys have had a good last couple weeks or so. And I hope you're having a good first weekend of the month of May in 2025. And no matter what time zone you're in, what part of the world you're from, I hope you're all having as best a time as possible. And I hope you'll be joining me tonight in either watching along or enjoying this qualifying session in Miami again, whether it's dry or wet in this session. A quick reminder as well, as I announced a couple weeks ago, and I officially announced on my channel community post page on my channel page, I will not be doing a race watch along. So this is the only watch along I'll be doing this weekend. Just so you guys know, because I know you guys love the race watch alongs that we do here. The race watch alongs will be returning in the next Grand Prix at Imola in 2 weeks' time, where I'll be doing both a quali and race watch along. So don't worry, it is coming back, no doubt about it, in a couple weeks' time. Couple reasons why I'm not doing a race watch along for this Grand Prix. One, the track is awful and it's so incredibly hard to overtake. Even in the sprint race, it was very hard to overtake unless you had a massive tire advantage, as we saw, when people were moved on to dry tires and that. That was the only time they really could make moves work in that sprint. So that's one reason. But secondly, I do have next week, a very big week ahead of me in terms of uni work. I'm at the very last, how many weeks? 3-4 weeks. I'm approaching now the final 3 to 4 weeks of my bachelor's honors media degree course, and yeah, next week is a massive week for me getting the work finished, and then hopefully looking all good in a couple weeks time. So also that is another reason why I'm not doing a race watch along for this Grand Prix, because I do need to rest up a bit and charge my batteries before I go absolutely all out next week to get that uni work done. So yeah, that's the reasons mainly why I'm only doing a qualifying stream here for this Miami Grand Prix. But like I said, in a couple of weeks at Imola, I'll be doing both a quali and race watch, so don't worry, that will be returning. And as well, what was I going to say? I should have said as well, because obviously we do this quite a bit. The build up to qualifying, I am going to be doing the usual build up, looking at what happened in sprint qualifying yesterday, and going into the lap times, who finished where. Also, we'll get into the sector time data just to understand why it ended up the way it did, and why certain teams are looking quick this weekend, and why certain teams are not, and also where certain teams could absolutely improve. So yeah, we'll be going through that. Obviously, I'll get into my final predictions for qualifying. We'll get into some key stats as well for the drivers and teams before qualifying. So yeah, pretty much the usual build-up for this qualifying session. Also, a quick disclaimer. If I do sound a bit groggy and a bit all over the place, I have had a very long day. I went and attended a football match earlier. And I got back on the train a few hours ago, and I've already had my dinner, and yeah, I'm pretty knackered. I've been awake since 6 o'clock this morning, and it's now almost 8 o'clock at night. So yeah, I am absolutely fucked. But I am, very keen to do this stream and cover this session, because this is probably going to be the most competitive part of the actual proper Grand Prix weekend. I don't see in the race tomorrow, unless we get some craziness with the weather, I don't really see positions changing really at all in tomorrow's Grand Prix from what they will be in this qualifying session. So, yeah, this is a crucial session indeed that we are going into. Before, though, as I said, before we go on to sprint qualifying and all of that data from yesterday, let's just quickly touch on the sprint race. So it started out where eventually it did start. There was delays, but eventually it started. Then it went dry midway through, and then we got a safety car with a few laps to go, and that massively benefited yet again for the second year in a row Lando Norris, who luckily won the sprint race. I know he was right on Piastri's tail before Piastri pitted, but without the safety car coming out when it did, Lando was not going to win that sprint race. Absolutely no way. So, yeah, despite that, Lando Norris wins the sprint. Second was Piastri, so Piastri only losing a point to Norris, which is absolutely fine for him. Good for Norris that he wins the sprint. Hopefully that gives him some confidence going forward for the rest of the weekend, but the sprint, a lot less important than this session and the race itself, the Sunday race. Lewis Hamilton finishing third, mainly down to a brilliant strategy called by Ferrari to get him in earlier than the others for dry tyres. Because before then, on the Inters, Lewis Hamilton was fending off Alex Albon in a Williams. He had no pace at all, and Ferrari have been very poor this weekend. Charles Leclerc, by the way, didn't even compete in the sprint race because he crashed on his way to the grid. and yeah, failed to start. Not sure if he is going to make qualifying. I think he will. I think there is enough time to get him out there. But yeah, that has been an awful uh, contributing factor, let's say, to what's already been a difficult weekend for the Scuderia. Yeah, Lewis Hamilton finishing third. Alex Albon fourth. On track, though, Max Verstappen actually finished in fourth. But when Max came in for dry tyres, he was running in third before everyone started coming in for a set of dry tyres. And then he came in, tyres went on, and Red Bull, like idiots, released Verstappen straight into the path of Antonelli, and that took off quite a bit of Max's front wing, which destroyed his race, and it destroyed Antonelli's race, who was running in fourth place. Obviously, Antonelli started the sprint race on pole. Antonelli had to then drive through the pits without pitting onto the dry tyres because he wasn't able to get into his pit box because obviously Max collided with him. So Antonelli's race was destroyed as well. So Albon finished in fourth. Verstappen was given, I think, a 10-second penalty for an unsafe release, which is absolutely fair enough. So Alex Albon finished in fourth. George Russell fifth. And then sixth, Stroll. Seventh, Lawson. And eighth, Oliver Behrman. Liam Lawson, by the way, very lucky to finish in seventh because he really did take out Fernando Alonso in that sprint race and is not deserving of a points finish from the sprint. And I've got to say, with the way Lawson has performed this season, he's very lucky to still be on the grid. He has been absolutely horrendous as Liam Lawson in 2025. But yeah, that's what happened in the sprint. And let's just quickly have a look at what that does to the championship standings. So Oscar Piastri still comfortable-ish in the lead, 9 points clear of Lando Norris. Max Verstappen now about 20 points off the championship lead. Not scoring a few points in this sprint race may be key at the end of the season because he was on for, I think, 5 points. And again, 5 points could be very important in Abu Dhabi. George Russell fourth. Russell about 30 points off the championship lead. Mercedes, though, in the dry, look to have a quick car. So this weekend is not over for Russell and Mercedes. There is still a big points finish, I think, on offer for Russell and Mercedes. Leclerc fifth, obviously didn't do the sprint race. Antonelli sixth. Hamilton up to, or still in seventh, but right on the tail of Antonelli. Alex Albon not even that far behind those two in eighth. Ocon in ninth, and Lance Stroll 3 points closer to Ocon in 10th. And then on the constructors' side, McLaren nearly 100 points clear of Mercedes. And I think by the end of this weekend, it very well could be the case that McLaren are 100 points clear of the next best team. They are dominating the Constructors' Championship, something they are going to win. I think we can safely say that McLaren are going to win the Constructors' Championship with the car they've got and the driver lineup they've got. Mercedes second, Red Bull third. Ferrari, though, after scoring a few points in the sprint, are only 5 points behind Red Bull in the fight for third. Williams now looking comfortable at the head of the midfield pack in fifth on 30 points, 9 points clear of Haas, who did score a point, but lagging quite a bit now behind Williams, who've had two good back-to-back races. Obviously, the race in Saudi Arabia, then the sprint race in Miami. And Williams, in general, look very quick around this track, as I'll show with the data from yesterday in a moment. Aston Martin obviously scored 3 points. They are still in seventh. Racing Bulls, though, with Lawson got a couple points. So Racing Bulls keeping close to Aston Martin. And then Alpine ninth and Sauber in P10. So I don't think any championship positions in the top 10 on the driver's side or on the constructors have actually changed around, but some slight differences, let's say, compared to what it was like before. Also, just want to quickly say, before we go any further, that of course there is a poll running at the top of the live chat where, as usual, I ask you guys who will take pole position for the Miami Grand Prix. And your options are the two McLaren drivers, Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris, or the two Mercedes drivers in George Russell and Kimi Antonelli. Out of those four, who do you think is the most likely to take pole position? Let me know between now and the start of Q3, which is in, about a couple hours from now. And we'll see what you guys have to say in regards to that. Anyway, let's go on to the results of sprint qualifying, which is really what matters when it comes to building up to this session. And it should be dry, this qualifying session. It won't be as good weather, I don't think, as what sprint qualifying was, where it was nice and sunny. But still should be dry. And in the dry, Kimi Antonelli got pole position. Now, because it's not a real pole position, he does not break the record yet of being the youngest ever pole sitter in Formula 1 history. He is the youngest pole sitter in the history of the sprint, which I don't think is ever going to be beaten. But yeah, that record of youngest ever pole sitter still goes on because it's not a real pole position, let's say. But still, what an effort from Antonelli. And Mercedes, again, in the dry, very impressive how quick they've been this weekend. And a real shame that the sprint was wet, because in the dry, Mercedes could have got, I think, a very strong result out of that sprint race. But Antonelli, brilliant job by him. And then the two McLarens, second and third. I do think McLaren still have a slightly quicker car compared to Mercedes, but it's nowhere near the gap between McLaren and Mercedes as big as we thought it was going to be coming into the weekend. It is close. Close enough for us to get excited, no doubt about that. So, Piastri second, Norris third. Max Verstappen fourth, a quarter of a second off the pace of Antonelli. Verstappen doing the best he can. That Red Bull car, as expected, just is not on the level of the McLaren or the Mercedes car. It is better, I would say, than the Ferrari car. I think that is pretty clear to see. Even in wet conditions, I think the Red Bull is superior. But not able to be fighting for pole, I don't think, that Red Bull. I mean, Max, his lap yesterday was not the absolute best it could have been, which I will show why that is the case soon enough. But even if he made those slight improvements, or Red Bull made those slight improvements, pole position still, I don't think, is quite there for him. So, yeah. I just don't think pole position is really on offer for Max Verstappen. George Russell fifth, being really outshone by Antonelli in sprint qualifying. 0.3 of a second ahead of Russell. Now, Antonelli so far this season has not been performing at, let's say, what is probably going to be his peak, at least during this season, if not during, obviously, his career. But for him to be 0.3 of a second quicker than Russell in what is Antonelli's best session of the season so far is quite incredible. It really, really is. I do think George Russell could have done a tad better in sprint quali. I think he probably should have been ahead of Max on the grid, because the Mercedes is pretty clearly quicker than the than the Red Bull. I think that is clear enough to see. But still, that lap time difference, that's very impressive. Very, very impressive. So yeah, what a job by Antonelli. The car is good, so let's not act like the car's rubbish and he somehow put it on pole for the sprint. But yeah, it is still a great, great lap that he did to just about eke himself ahead of the championship leader Oscar Piastri in what is, again, probably a faster car. And then after Russell, the two Ferraris, who, I mean, with Leclerc, 0.3 of a second off pole, not a lot, but when you consider how close things are this weekend in the dry, it's way too much. And as I'll show in a moment with the sector time data, I don't think there's really anywhere on the track Ferrari could do much better to put themselves in a position where they are, fighting at least for a top three. Ferrari do not have the pace this weekend at all. Lewis Hamilton, again, the only reason he got a podium in the sprint was because of Ferrari's brilliant call on the strategy to get him on the dry tyres a lot sooner than the others. If they didn't do that, Lewis would have finished probably 6th, 7th, something like that. He was really struggling, Hamilton, before the dry tyre phase came. He had Alex Albon in a Williams all over his back. When the Ferrari car, we know, is quicker than the Williams. Not by miles, but it is quicker. We know that. So yeah, Ferrari have got a lot of issues. The car just doesn't handle well enough. The front end, I've heard the drivers complain about, and the front end especially, is just not quite going in to these corners in Miami like they need it to. And that's why they are where they are, the slowest of the front four teams. And they're not too far behind Williams with Alexander Albon. They were 8th in sprint qualifying. Albon, once again, doing an amazing job. He's had such a good season, has Albon. I am disappointed, though, in what happened with Carlos Sainz. Now, I don't know the reason why he didn't do a lap time in SQ2. I will admit I didn't watch the session, really. I only watched the pole position lap that Kimi did. But, again, Albon ending up as the clear winner and team leader in that fight when, no disrespect to Albon, he's having a great season, but given what we know Carlos Sainz is capable of, there is no excuse for Carlos Sainz to be way lower down on the grid like he was. Sainz should be splitting, in my view, Hamilton and Albon on the grid, maybe even getting ahead of Hamilton on the grid, because Albon was only, a tenth and a half back. So, yeah, Sainz he's got to be right in there. The car is very quick. There's no excuse as far as I'm concerned. Isaac Hadjar for Racing Bulls, great effort, getting himself in the top 10, and a great effort from Fernando Alonso, getting in the top 10 with the Aston Martin, which appears to be a bit stronger this weekend than it's been in the last couple Grand Prix. And then the rest of the field, it was Hulkenberg in 11th, Ocon 12th, Gasly 13th, and then Lawson, Sainz, Stroll, Doohan, Tsunoda. Awful weekend he's had so far, but at least can reset for this qualifying session and go again. Bortoletto 19th and Oliver Behrman, absolutely shocking in sprint qualifying, but then ended up finishing 8th in the sprint race. He has a real knack for comeback drives, does Behrman. Sauber, though, very impressive speed they had in sprint qualifying. Very impressed by them. Haas, I think, with Behrman, doing what he did towards the end of that sprint, showing the Haas car had a lot more potential. So good to see there. The Alpine, I wouldn't say is by far the slowest car on the grid this weekend, but it looks like it is just about the slowest car out there. So yeah, Alpine, very disappointing for them to be where they're at. And then, yeah, you've got the rest of the order there. So, an interesting pecking order, let's say, coming out of sprint qualifying. Because, by the way, I can tell you that it is dry in Miami because the F1 Academy race is on their formation lap. And it looks actually not just dry, but mostly sunny or a bit sunny. So, yeah, looks good at the moment. But to understand why it ended up the way it did and why certain teams are where they are this weekend, go through the sector time data. The first sector is all about downforce. And especially with the high speed corners, we know the Red Bull is very good through those. We've seen that this season, and no surprise, Max in the Red Bull is at the top. I think a bit surprising just how far he is ahead of the McLaren, nearly a tenth of a second, but not a surprise that the Red Bull is looking as good as it is in the first sector. That is going to be clearly the strongest part of the track for that Red Bull car. Mercedes, good through this part of the lap. Ferrari, I think, could do better. Probably a tenth of a second or so. But again, the lack of front end they've got is slightly hurting them a bit in this first sector, but I think it's hurting them a lot more, like it is for Red Bull as well, who still are suffering with their front end in the other parts of the lap. And then a big drop off to Racing Bulls, who, no surprise, the quickest team in the midfield through this part of the lap. Does suit those high-speed corners in the first sector, does suit that Racing Bulls car quite a lot. We've seen that this year, that in high-speed corners, that Racing Bulls car also, just like its sister team, very strong. It's almost like they're related. Williams, pretty good. Aston Martin, not too bad. Haas, okay as well. And then a slight drop-off to Alpine, and then quite a big drop-off to Sauber. And it is quite remarkable how quick Sauber were in sprint qualifying, despite being so far off in the first sector. If they could only have an extra couple tenths of a second, Hulkenberg probably would have made it into the top 10. And then the middle sector, you've got obviously the long DRS straight and then a load of awful corners. And I mean awful corners. Pedestrian, awful, low grip corners that everybody hates. And especially Ferrari and Red Bull hate, because it really does not suit their car at all. No surprise, McLaren and Mercedes, the two quickest teams through those slower speed corners. They are a lot better in the slow speed corners than Ferrari and Red Bull are. Ferrari lagging behind by nearly 0.2 of a second. Not surprising. Not anything that I think Ferrari can do much about. Williams, though, have had a pretty good car through those slower speed corners, and they're right in there, as you can see, in the middle sector. And then you've got Red Bull, a quarter of a second off McLaren, and a couple tenths behind Mercedes. And yeah, the front end of the Red Bull, just like the Ferrari, not working through those slow, meandering corners. And that really is hurting them. Then a bit of a drop-off to Aston Martin. Decent pace from them. Much better from Sauber. And then Racing Bulls, Alpine, and Haas rounding out the field in the middle sector. And then the final sector is one long DRS straight into a hairpin, and then you exit the hairpin and you're flat out to the finish line. So straight line speed, also your cornering and exit from a slow speed corner really is important. And because of because of that hairpin, McLaren and Mercedes yet again, the two quickest teams in the final sector. Williams very good as well. Ferrari, I think, probably should be a slight bit closer in this part of the lap, but again, does it make a massive difference to their overall pace? Probably not. And then you've got Sauber ahead of Red Bull. Red Bull definitely can do a slight bit better as well in this part of the lap. So Red Bull and Ferrari, I think the point I'm trying to make is they could get closer to pole position, but ultimately I don't think those cars are good enough to get onto pole position. But the gap could be closed by maybe a tenth and a half. We'll see if that does happen. Then you've got Aston Martin, Racing Bulls, Haas, and Alpine rounding out the rest of the field. But if we go back to the top 10 from sprint qualifying, the pecking order isn't the easiest to select this weekend because it's a bit up in the air, I think, in certain areas. I will still say I think McLaren have, not by miles, but I think by maybe a tenth or two. I think McLaren have got the best car. Mercedes definitely second. Third, I would go Red Bull purely because in the first sector the Red Bull is looking genuinely good. Ferrari, I don't think have a good speed in any part of the lap. They're not on it this weekend. So Ferrari, I'd go fourth. Williams clearly fifth. Sixth, Racing Bulls. Seventh. That's where it gets difficult, where you've got teams like Aston Martin, Sauber, and Haas. I think Alpine are definitely the slowest team, not by miles, but I think they are the slowest team. So Alpine are definitely for me 10th. I think 7th, I would probably go with Haas because we know there is more potential in that car than what is probably with the Aston Martin or to an extent Sauber. So I would probably say the Haas 7th, and then 8th, I would probably say Sauber. Alonso dragging that car into the top 10, I think, is a lot down to Alonso rather than the car being, quite a bit better. So I'd say Aston Martin, probably 9th best, and then, like I said, Alpine 10th. But that area behind Williams and Racing Bulls, with Aston Martin, Sauber, Haas, and to a degree Alpine, it's very close. Very, very close. So we will see how that all shakes out, whether any of those teams make Q3, and just how that all plays out. But that is the data from sprint qualifying. Hope it's given you guys an educated view as to what maybe should happen in this qualifying session, which is coming up, by the way, in just under 1 hour from now. Let me get into my final full prediction for qualifying. And not really a surprise, I've gone Oscar Piastri in the McLaren. Again, I don't think he's going to be on pole by a mile. I'm going to go a tenth of a second ahead of Antonelli, who, even though he had a bit of a messy sprint race, I think he will get over that pretty quickly, and I think he'll be on the front row with Piastri like he was for the sprint. George Russell, though, I think will be closer in third. Lando Norris, I'm going fourth. I still have my doubts about Lando delivering when it really matters, so that's why I think Lando will lag behind. In fourth, Max Verstappen, best I can see for him is fifth. Sixth, Charles Leclerc. Of course, that's only if Leclerc does make qualifying. I'll check in a moment to see if he is going to make qualifying. Lewis Hamilton, I think just about ends up in P7, more so because of the car than his own performance, because he's still not performing at a great level, we have to say. And then 8th, Carlos Sainz, who I think will perform a lot more to form in this session. Alex Albon will be just behind in 9th, and then completing the top 10, Yuki Tsunoda in the Red Bull, who I think will use this session as a clean slate, and he will get himself just about into the top 10. So there you go. That is my final prediction for qualifying. Let me know, guys, in the live chat. Do you agree? Do you disagree? There is a poll running, of course, in the chat where you guys can let me know who you think the most likely driver out of those 4 options in the poll is to get pole position. Again, let me know over the next, say, hour and a half or so. Sorry if my throat's seizing up a bit. It's I've had quite a dry mouth and dry throat today because of the heat. So, yeah. Apologies about that. I'll have a gulp on my water in a moment, which definitely should help. But, yeah, that's how I think things will play out. It will be close, but in the end, I think McLaren and Oscar Piastri, the championship leader, will come out on top in this crucial qualifying session. So, Yeah, we've got 50 or about to be 54 minutes to go until qualifying. I will just quickly check to see if there is any further delays. I don't think there will be. And like I said, I will just quickly check to see if there is any news regarding Charles Leclerc's car and whether he will absolutely make it for qualifying. Ferrari need him to make qualifying. They absolutely need him to make qualifying, because if they go into qualifying with Lewis Hamilton as their only car, they are not going to have a good session. Because Lewis, I know he got the podium in the sprint, but again, it was mainly down to his team helping him out, getting on the dry tyres as soon as he did. If you look at Hamilton's pace this weekend, it still has not been good enough. And again, look at the sprint race before he switched onto dry tyres. He was absolutely nowhere before that pit stop. So, yeah, they have to have Leclerc enter qualifying, because he's their only hope of a result in qualifying that puts them in the position that they could maybe fight for a podium. Anyway, make sure to keep your comments coming in the chat, and as well, make sure to smash the like button, as we are on 21 likes. Let's try and get up to 40 plus likes if we can in the next, say, half an hour or so. As well, if you guys don't know, I know a few of you have watched the video, but I did upload a video on Tuesday, which is doing decently well. It's got about 5,000 views or so. I uploaded a video going over the championship contenders that I think we've got for 2025, and simply asked you guys who is the favourite to win the driver's title for 2025. The link to that video is in the description. So again, if you haven't seen it yet, make sure to do so, and as well, go give that video a like as well. But before I come to your comments, and again, make sure to keep those comments coming, just want to check a couple things. I've just seen Oliver Behrman's received a 5-second time penalty for an unsafe release in the sprint. So, not sure if Behrman is actually going to keep his 8th place. Let me see. Right, so there is no more delays to qualifying, which is good. Let me just check. Right, hold on. Let me just check to see if there's any news about whether Leclerc will be out there. And no, can't see anything. The last thing Ferrari on their X account tweeted was that it was a setback before the sprint, because obviously Leclerc was not going to take part after that crash he had. But the day's not over, which suggests to me that they think they could probably get him out for qualifying. So, yeah. He should be fine, is what I'm trying to say. And like I said, for Ferrari's sake, they need him out there, because they really need, their best driver in play. Because, I mean, without the sprint races this season, Lewis Hamilton would be in no man's land. Hello to all of you, by the way, in the chat. Emmanuel Gosso, Elamaine Wade. And yeah, Crystal Race saying, yeah, good to see all of you who are watching. Hope you all had a good day. Strickler, I think it is. asks if Antonelli is doing this great with the car, did Hamilton make a mistake? The Mercedes is better than the Ferrari, so yeah, you could say technically Lewis made a mistake. But the thing is Lewis, he did not want to retire just yet from Formula One when Mercedes were not going to offer him a new contract. Or the new contract they were going to offer him was going to be his last when Lewis was not quite ready for that. So that was always going to sway him to leave Mercedes, despite the performance of the car maybe improving. I think, though, even if Hamilton had stayed at Mercedes, I still don't think Lewis would be getting significantly better results because, as is being proven, even though some people I saw with my last podcast that I uploaded a couple of weeks ago, there was a couple of people that got offended by what I think is clearly the truth at this point, that Lewis Hamilton is past his best and is mostly washed. Because of that, even if it wasn't that Mercedes, would Hamilton be getting much better results? I'm not sure he would, to be honest. So, yeah. And Strickler says, still think Max wins at the end of the season. Yeah, as I said in that video, yeah, I think Max is still the favourite. Whether he will actually win it, again, who knows? Because the Red Bull needs to improve if Max is going to have a good enough chance, because that Red Bull is inconsistent to say the least. But yeah, it's going to be no doubt a great championship fight going down to the end of the season. Rickard says, I think you're underestimating Norris. Maybe I am, but I'm basing my prediction off of his latest form. And if you look at qualifying this season, he's been very erratic as Lando. I think a lot of the time has not delivered the pace that he should have delivered, or the result he should have delivered. So based on that form, I don't really see it changing with Lando, because I think he is not quite strong enough to change his fortunes around that well. Hankam says Behrman 5 second and Verstappen 10 second is BS. Yes, Kimi got screwed, but not by Max, but by Red Bull. So why the 5 second difference? I think probably because the Red Bull unsafe release was just that much worse than the Behrman one. I've not seen the Behrman one, but I'm guessing no contact was made. But with the Max one, that was quite heavy contact. And yeah, obviously Max didn't mean to do it, but a penalty needs to be received for such an egregious action, and it was. So I think it's fair enough, to be honest. And yeah, just still watching the F1 Academy race, which is still going on the track. They're under a safety car. There's only a few laps to go. What will make things interesting, though, for this qualifying session coming up in about 45 minutes is that, of course, the rain washed away not all the rubber, because these drivers are laying down some rubber, but the track will not be in as good condition probably as it was for sprint qualifying. So, yeah. The pit distance is very small. Yeah, it is. The pit lane in Miami is actually quite a bit smaller than um most tracks, to be honest. Which, I mean, because and this is the thing with street circuits. This is the bad thing with street circuits is things. You know, let me rephrase that instead of saying things. The area is designed the way it is, and there's nothing you can do really to change that. You have to design your F1 circuit around that, which is why most street circuits suck, because you have to, again, design the circuit around what's already there, and what you end up getting is something that's not very great. So, yeah. And by the way, horrific news came out yesterday that the Miami Grand Prix has been granted a 16-year contract. The Miami Grand Prix will remain on the calendar until 2041. Just ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. That a Grand Prix, yes, I know it brings in money. That's all Liberty Media care about, is the money. I mean, they're American capitalist company. They're a hardcore capitalist company. So, all they do care about is money at the end of the day. But for a Grand Prix that long term is not going to help increase the sport's popularity in terms of entertainment and exciting racing, that is just horrible news. It really is. And as we saw earlier, and this is a big reason why I'm not doing a race watch along tomorrow. Because if you go back and watch the sprint, yeah, we had some crazy, stuff going on with people going on to dry tyres versus people that, hadn't pitted for dry tyres yet, and it made it a bit exciting. I'm not going to pretend that the sprint race was not exciting, but we saw it so clearly in the wet running that even in the wet, it is basically impossible to overtake at this track. It's an awful track. Absolutely awful track. Whether, not just for the possibility of overtaking, but just on its own, it's not a good track. At least with Monaco, yeah, you can't overtake at Monaco, but at least the track is very fun to drive, and it's very exciting to watch the cars weave their way through the streets of Monte Carlo. It's not exciting watching these cars around Miami on their own, never mind together, because you're not going to get an overtake really ever around this circuit unless it's like an easy DRS pass. So yeah, I absolutely hate this track. I really do. Is it the worst track on the calendar? Quite possibly. Yeah, it is. There are other tracks out there on the calendar that I really also do not like. Baku is another one. Even though, yeah, last year it produced a really great race, I think the enjoyment level of driving that circuit is very low. It's there's not really anything fun about that circuit. The only thing that really creates excitement is that mammoth straight, all the way going down to the first corner. Without that, Baku would be easily one of the worst tracks of all time. The Mexico track as well, really not good for overtaking. At least though, it's it can be a bit good for qualifying. That's at least a bit of a redeeming quality, let's say. But with this Miami track, there is no redeeming qualities. Again, you can't sit there and go, well, it's not easy to overtake, but at least in qualifying, it's fun to watch the cars drive this track. It's not. It just is not. And as well, these cars, being as big as they are, look so hopelessly slow in the slow corners, in like the middle sector and even the final sector. It doesn't look good at all. But again, money talks. It is all about money. It's not about how good your product is or how good the quality of the product is. It's all about money and how much you can get away with, selling tickets at ridiculous prices. That's all Liberty Media care about. They do not care about the quality of the product. All they care about is how much can they get away with ripping off people who are interested in coming to a race. That is all they care about. Just like, say, WWE, who, I mean, I like WWE, but they just had a massive event where, even though a lot of people attended, they absolutely, in certain aspects, ripped the hell off a lot of their fans with just some disgusting prices. And that is pretty much what Liberty Media, that is, the type of plan they're on. And I only see ticket prices getting even worse for Formula One as we go forward. Abu Dhabi. The new Abu Dhabi circuit is a lot better than the old one used to be. But even the old one, I thought was better than this Miami track. So, yeah, Abu Dhabi's not great, but it's better than this Miami circuit. This Miami circuit is just... It really is horrible. It does, for me, it rivals the Sochi Autodrome, I think it was called. It rivals that circuit for just being, again, a horrible circuit. Is it as bad as Sochi? I'm not sure it is as bad, but it's in the ballpark. Let's say that. Ronan says, I remember you called it exactly in 2018 as it is when the plans came up for this track. I can't remember, to be honest, whenever I talked about the original plans for... I remember it being announced in, was it 2018 or 2019? Was when the Miami Grand Prix was announced it was coming. And yeah, I think we did look at the track layout, but I can't remember what it was because I don't think it was the same as what they actually went with. But yeah, it just looked absolutely awful from the get-go and hasn't got any better, really. Hank says, and F1 is only to a part of the Las Vegas track, so we'll have 3 USA Grand Prix for a long time, I guess. We will, and also, remember, Spa is not going to be on the calendar in, I think, is it 2028 and 2030? I think in those couple years, Spa will be taking a break from the calendar. One of the greatest circuits on the planet, and it always has been ever since it, became a racing track. Can't race there every year, but no, we must race in the Miami shitdrome that is this Grand Prix circuit. It is just awful. It really, really is. You're an F1 word and said it was awful. Yeah, that was a long time ago. What would have been about 7 years ago. So yeah, I'm not sure I'd remember that, but yeah, I was never on board with the Grand Prix in Miami because I knew that again, the circuit they would come up with would not be good. Hank says Spa and Zandvoort both. Zandvoort 2026 the last year. Exactly. Now Zandvoort, yeah, it's not the best track for racing. It is probably a bit too tight of a circuit. At least it is a fun circuit to drive, though. It's got a lot of challenging corners, unique corners. It has that about it. It has character. Again, this Miami circuit, zero character. Absolutely fuck all character. But yeah, Zandvoort is coming off the calendar. Zandvoort, that Dutch Grand Prix, was one of the best races when it came to ticket prices, which I'm thinking might be a reason why they're getting rid of it, because the organizers were adamant in not absolutely gouging their fans or the spectators that showed up. So Liberty of like, fuck it, let's get rid of it and get a track replacing it that will charge, double for the same product. So yeah, still very disappointing the way things are heading, and on track right now, things are good in terms of competitiveness. We have a possibility of a four-way drivers' championship fight, multiple different winners. That's great, but next year it is quite likely that one team will be quite far ahead of the others and dominate, at least for the first couple years. If that continues for a while, though, with the way things are going in Formula One, the product long term could be at serious risk of just, plummeting. I mean, remember, I'm not sure what the viewing figures are like now, but remember after 2021, I think, was it in 2023, if you compared the viewing figures in 2023 to 2021, the viewing figures were down nearly 90% in a lot of cases, and even on social media, it was down massively. So even though things are good at the minute, it can change very quickly in a bad way. Anyway, before though I read any more of your comments, which I will do, I just need to post the stream link out one more time. So just give me a second, guys, so I can do this. Come join us here to watch along qualifying in Miami, and hopefully we'll get a few others joining us soon enough, as we have got half an hour, I think it is, or just over half an hour until qualifying begins in Miami. Ferrari, by the way, as you can see on the screen now, gone for that special livery with all the blue HP stuff. I didn't mind the blue HP logo last year, where it was just the HP logo that was blue and everything else was red and black. But this special livery is just taking the piss. This much blue on a Ferrari is just unacceptable. It really is. I know HP is the main, I think, title sponsor, but come on, we can do better than this. Right, let's find some other comments from you guys. Make sure to keep them coming. Darsel Raven asks, will Oscar Piastri just take the World Drivers' Championship 2025? He takes great racing lines like a world champion. He knows where to go. it is, I think, given what we've seen so far this season, it is likely that, yeah, he could win the championship. Will he win it? I think it's way too early to sit here and say that, yes, he is absolutely the clear favourite or that he's going to win it. If he does win this weekend, though, that would be massive because he would have then 4 wins for the season from the first 6 races when Max and Lando would only have 1 win. And then obviously Russell with 0. And Piastri would really start to pull clear of the rest of the field. So, yeah, Oscar, if he wants to be world champion, I think this weekend, absolutely, he has to win. Because remember, at the next Grand Prix in Imola in 2 weeks, a lot of teams are bringing upgrades. McLaren, I'm sure, are as well. But Mercedes, Ferrari, and Red Bull are bringing some big upgrades that might transform their seasons. And McLaren might not be the dominant force that they've been so far this season in a couple of weeks from now. So Piastri has got to strike whilst the iron is still hot. It might still be hot in a couple of weeks, but we don't know for sure. Ronan asking, do you think the rule changes for next year are good? Yes, in terms of, every so often we do need to evolve the regulations. I like that the current set of regulations that, obviously this is the last year of these regulations. I like that the regulations have not really been changed at all since 2022. I know we had a couple technical directives which altered things to a degree, but really, other than that, it's been the same, since 2022. But yeah, once every 4 to 5 years, we do need to step forward, whether it be aerodynamically or, technology-wise when it comes to the power unit. So I am fine with it. But it's going to lead to a situation where what do you call it? Like we saw for the first half of this ground effect era that we're now coming to the final few months of, Red Bull dominated the first half of this ground effect era. They won, so many races. It was like 35, 40 races nearly that they won over the course of like a 2.5 year period. That is, sadly, we could be really heading for that again. 2026 and 2027 might be some real boring seasons because normally when regulations change in a big way, you'll get one team a clear step ahead of the rest who will then dominate. We saw, with the last big engine regulation change in 2014, Mercedes were a clear step ahead, and it took another big set of regulations coming in, new set of regulations coming in for that to be not halted, but for that advantage to be pegged back quite a bit in 2017. So I really hope that we still have at least a couple different teams fighting for the championship next year. Let's say Mercedes do have the strongest power unit next year, which is the rumor that they are already a step ahead of the others in the engine department. Of course, remember, yes, you've got the Mercedes Works team, but you've also got McLaren, and all McLaren would need to do in that context would be to provide a car that aerodynamically and chassis wise is as good, if not better, than the Mercedes. And then you've got, still at least a couple different teams, albeit powered by the same manufacturer. You've got 2 different teams fighting for the championship. But My fear is that it will just be one team, winning basically every race in in next year and even maybe the year after as well. I really hope that that's not the case, but that's what tends to happen again when a new set of regulations come in. Is one team is a clear step ahead of the rest, and then it takes quite a bit of work to peg that back. I mean, look at again with these ground effect cars. Look at how long it took until we got some competition for Red Bull. It was until this time last year, after a couple years of absolute domination, finally we got McLaren and Ferrari to an extent, and then later on a bit Mercedes, who were able to actually fight Red Bull pure performance. So yeah, we'll see what happens, but I'm fine with I'm fine with the new set of regulations. I'm just fearful as to what type of, say, Formula One seasons it could lead to. So, we will see. Um, Will F1 saying Norris is enormously overrated by some people. Yeah, there are still people that back him absolutely, and they will never stop backing him. But I think, to be honest, if you look at my opinions on Lando ever since he came onto the grid, which was not too long after this channel started, I've always had doubts about Norris. I've always thought there was potential there. I'm not going to say Lando's an awful driver or anything, because he's not. But I've always had some doubts. When with someone like George Russell, I've had a lot less doubts, because I've always believed a lot more in Russell than I have Norris. Um. So yeah, and I think looking back at those years where Norris was at McLaren, but McLaren were not able to fight for race wins on a consistent basis, I think we may have to almost look back at those years and almost ask ourselves, was this really as impressive as we thought at the time? Or was this, or these types of results compared to certain teammates, not quite as good as maybe some want to make us believe they were, if you know what I mean? So, yeah, that's what I think. Uh, I think in the last couple of weeks, especially, I have thought that with Lando, in terms of maybe we have overrated him, maybe a bit too much after those seasons where he, comfortably outqualified and outraced Daniel Ricciardo. Maybe, again, maybe we were a little too um excited over that, given that Ricciardo, as we found out later on, was clearly past his prime. So yeah. Ronan in the chat saying most British media seem to rate Norris more than Russell. I don't really rate Norris, good driver, but not in the top 5 on the grid. The reason not even British media, the reason the media rate him more than Russell is because Lando is factually more popular than George Russell is because of his social media presence. And Lando is, much more, say, popular with the casuals or the kids. and more kids know who Lando Norris is than know who George Russell is. So I think that's a lot more so why they back him over Russell is because of his off-circuit popularity. When I think real followers and lovers of Formula One know by this point that George Russell is better than Lando Norris. And I don't think it's really massively up for debate anymore. Russell, I think, is consistently better over a single lap. He doesn't make as many mistakes as Lando does. Much better in race situations. I mean, Russell is not the best in wheel-to-wheel combat, but I think he's better than Lando. Which, again, might not be a compliment necessarily for Russell, but I would say he's better. And yeah, I just think all around is superior to Lando. And obviously with Lewis Hamilton coming to the final probably couple years of his career, there's always been the talk of who is going to be the next great British driver to not surpass, but to succeed Lewis Hamilton as the top British driver. And I have always thought that person to be George Russell. I've been following Russell, his results ever since, 2016, 17-ish? Because I heard of the guy back then and heard that, he was rated very highly. Looked at his results, was impressed, and then, kept checking him out. F3, F2, and just got more impressed. And with what he's done in Formula One compared to what Lando's done, I think what Russell's done has been more impressive. But let me just read out, I think, a couple more comments, and then we'll go on to the teams quickly, because I just want to quickly do a roundup of the teams and, how they all should get on in this session. One good comment, which I just saw in regards to what I was just talking about, is Will F1 just said Tsunoda dominated Ricciardo like what Norris did. And that's exactly what's been kind of sitting in my head in regards to, have we overrated Lando for what he's done in his career so far? Because if Tsunoda was beating Ricciardo as comfortably as Lando was, does that mean Tsunoda is as good as Lando? Or does that mean Ricciardo was really just that much past his prime? And it actually wasn't as big of an achievement to be ahead of Ricciardo as much as he was. That is something to consider. It absolutely is. But yeah, it's maybe a debate for another day. Anyway, 15 minutes remain until qualifying, so let's quickly go through a roundup of the teams and how they should all get on. We'll start with McLaren. Pole position really should be got by McLaren as long as the two drivers actually deliver the best laps they can. Both drivers have been a bit inconsistent when it comes to qualifying, when it comes to delivering their absolute best lap in Q3. We saw it in Suzuka, both drivers not quite hooking the lap together. And even the last Grand Prix in Saudi Arabia, Lando, of course, crashed in Q3, and then Oscar didn't quite get the whole lap hooked up like he wanted, and ended up just behind Max Verstappen, second on the grid. So it is something to watch out for with McLaren. The two drivers, again, haven't always been the most consistent when it comes to getting that final Q3 lap right. But if, say, Oscar Piastri does, it's going to be very, very hard to stop him getting pole position in what is still, I think, just about the quickest car. Red Bull obviously pinning their hopes massively on Max Verstappen. If Max can end up on the second row of the grid, I think they would be satisfied with that. I think happy would be way too extreme of a word because obviously this team is used to winning races so often. But a second row start for tomorrow, given whatever the weather might be, would put Red Bull with Max in a decent enough position where he could claim a good amount of points in the race tomorrow. So they need to be, again, at least on the second row of the grid. If they can get in the top three, that would be great. But that is going to be pretty hard to do, given that that Red Bull car is not one of the quickest cars here in Miami. Ferrari, they are the slowest of the top four teams. Hopefully for them, Leclerc is able to compete in qualifying. But yeah, Ferrari are lagging just a bit too far behind the others. And I'd be very surprised if they were to get a car in the top three on the grid. It would take something quite special or fortunate for that to happen. Mercedes, I think, are the closest contender quite clearly to McLaren in this session. If anyone is going to beat McLaren's pole, Mercedes, I think, are that team. Antonelli, can he do it again and can he become officially the youngest pole sitter in Formula One history? We will find out. George Russell, though, has been consistently ahead of Antonelli until really this weekend so far this season. So watch out for Russell. We know what he can do in qualifying. But watch out for Mercedes. The car in the dry is good and should not be downplayed, I think, their level of performance. Aston Martin pinning their hopes on Fernando Alonso, who made them look semi-competitive in the sprint qualifying and sprint race. Obviously, a lot of damage to that Aston Martin after the sprint race. I'm not sure if that's going to affect Alonso for this qualifying session. Might not even make it out for qualifying. I will check that in a moment, whether he's okay to compete. But yeah, if Alonso can get the absolute maximum out of that car, that gives them a chance to be in a decent position for the race. Alpine, sadly, got the slowest car. Haas are looking decent. Really should be getting both cars into Q2. Ocon yesterday in sprint qualifying was in P12 and not a million miles away from the top 10. A top 10 is possible, but I wouldn't say likely, given where they are respective to other midfield teams like Racing Bulls, who I would say are ahead of them by a slight amount in qualifying trim. Isaac Hadjar has had a decent weekend so far. Liam Lawson, even though he took Fernando Alonso out the way he did score a couple points, which is at least, good for him. But yeah, Hadjar is the one I would pin my hopes on if you're Racing Bulls, because Lawson, most of the time this season, has been quite poor. Williams are the team to beat in the midfield. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Carlos Sainz, though, really do hope he actually performs as well as he can. Because if he does, there's a fourth row grid slot, I think, probably waiting for him for tomorrow's Grand Prix. Williams should be getting both cars into Q3. And then for Sauber, keep an eye on them. Nico Hulkenberg, pretty quick in sprint qualifying up in P11. They are not to be counted out. And Bortoletto, if he can just improve on what he's done so far this weekend, might be able to sneak his way into Q2 and have a decent session himself. So yeah, watch out for Sauber. But a quick reminder, here is my top 10 final qualifying prediction. Oscar Piastri, I think, just about takes pole from Antonelli second, Russell third, and then Norris, Verstappen, Leclerc, Hamilton, Sainz, Albon, and Tsunoda is my top 10. Let me know, who do you think gets pole here in Miami? And you can let me know either in the poll running in the chat or let me know via the via commenting in the chat. And there you go. 10 more minutes until we are underway. And like I said, I am just going to check whether Alonso and his car is all good. So just give me a second, guys. and there's not been any news in regards to whether Alonso is not going to make qualifying. And let me look at Ferrari's Twitter to see if there's any news on their end. And Leclerc is in his car, or at least has had a test of how the car feels in the garage. So Leclerc, by the looks of it, is good to go. By the way, Alex Albon has now been given a 5-second time penalty for not staying above the minimum time under the safety car. So I have no idea what the results of the sprint look like anymore. Obviously, the championship positions are now fucked up a bit because of that. So, yeah, we'll see what the actual results are once it's all said and done. Jurgen says Norris on pole. Strickler says Verstappen, Piastri, Leclerc, Russell for their top 4. Let's see if I can find any more comments. By the way, if you haven't hit the like button yet, make sure to do so. We're on 30 likes. Let's try and get up to 50 plus likes if we can in the next 10 minutes or so. Of course, hitting the like button does help show me that you guys enjoy the content and helps in the algorithm as well. As, yeah, I was just saying now on Sky F1, they've got Leclerc's car pretty much ready for action. And now Antonelli, still at only 18 years old, is getting his helmet on. As qualifying about 7 minutes away in what looks like it's going to be a dry session. Looking at the cloud formations. But let me find some other comments here quick before we move on. Hencam says Verstappen beat Sainz in 2015 and Sainz beat Norris at McLaren. But Piastri will beat Norris, in my opinion. This year, yeah, quite possibly. But I think looking at how Carlos Sainz did against Lando Norris in 2019 and 2020, we've always assumed that Lando, he improved massively from 2020 to 2021. Did he improve? I think to a degree, yeah. But did he improve as much as we thought he did at the time? I'm not sure anymore if he actually did. Because again, Daniel Ricciardo, when he joined McLaren, was not performing at the same level that Carlos Sainz was. I think people would agree with that. And also, it does make you think, just, when he's at his best, how good Carlos Sainz can be. When you look at what Lando Norris has done in the last year or so. And, let's say Carlos Sainz last year was in the McLaren instead of Piastri. Would Carlos Sainz have put up a better fight for the championship than Lando Norris? Maybe. So, yeah, it's just interesting things to consider. And Brooks actually just posting in the chat there some good news from Aston Martin, who've said, quote, Fernando's car expected to be ready for qualifying after the damage picked up in the sprint. Amongst other things, we have changed the gearbox, right front corner, floor, rear wing, and front wing. So, yeah. Alonso, thankfully, is able to compete. But I think it's time we move on to a final couple things before we get into this session, as we are not very far away at all. Not sure how relevant a lot of these championship standings are anymore after some penalties applied post-sprint race, but As it stands, it is Oscar Piastri in the lead going into this qualifying session by 9 points over Lando Norris. Max Verstappen in third, 19 points off the lead. George Russell in fourth, 29 points off the lead. And then Leclerc in fifth, quite a drop off to Leclerc in fifth. Antonelli sixth, Hamilton a bit closer in seventh. Albon in eighth, not sure he's on 25 points anymore, but he's still, I'm sure, in eighth in the championship. Ocon at ninth and Lance Stroll in P10. And then on the constructors' side, McLaren nearly 100 points clear of Mercedes, who are in second, not far ahead of Red Bull third, who have got Ferrari now very close on their tail in fourth. Williams in fifth, Haas sixth, Aston Martin seventh, Racing Bulls eighth, Alpine ninth, and Sauber still last. I say still last, but they've only been last for a couple races. But let's go on to some of the front-running teams and drivers and some key stats regarding their history, qualifying-wise, here in Miami. For McLaren, they have never taken pole in Miami, but they have taken pole in 3 of the 5 races so far in 2025. They are the kings of getting pole position in 2025 as it stands. Last year, 5th and 6th they were in qualifying. Of course, went on, luckily, to win the race and take their first win of the year. For Red Bull, they've been very successful here in Miami since the invention of the Grand Prix. Last pole position in Miami was last year with Max Verstappen, and they've taken pole in 2 of the 3 races we've had here in Miami. And last year, 1st and 4th, they were on the grid. This Grand Prix last year, though, was the beginning of the descent of their performance. And this is absolutely where things turned around in 2024. Can it do the same in 2025, this time in a positive way? We will find out. For Ferrari, they have actually took pole position here in Miami. They took it in the first ever Miami Grand Prix in 2022 with Charles Leclerc. They actually locked out the front row that particular weekend. That's their only pole in Miami. And last year, they did pretty well. 2nd and 3rd in qualifying, and we're not very far lap time-wise away from pole. I think they'd be very, very happy if they were to end up 2nd and 3rd here in qualifying. And finally for Mercedes, Mercedes also like McLaren, never taken pole in Miami. Their last pole position in F1 was in Qatar in 2024 with George Russell, and even that, Russell did not actually qualify first. He only started on pole because of a 1-place penalty that day. For Max Verstappen, last year, 7th and 8th they were in qualifying. They will be a lot better, I'm sure, today. But Q1, guys, will be underway in a few moments' time, a couple minutes from now. And of course, I will sync up the timer at the 17-minute mark. An 18-minute long session Q1 is, where we knock out the bottom 5 drivers. And whoever, as you know, ends up below the dotted line at the end of Q1 is out. As all the drivers already in the pit lane queuing up because of the possibility of rain, which is still, by the looks of it, in the distance, but I'm not sure if it's actually approaching the circuit or not. But at the minute, the circuit is baked in sunshine. Oscar Piastri, though, still in the garage, so McLaren are pretty content to just leave Piastri in the garage for now. As a session should be getting underway in a few seconds from now. Remember that poll in the chat will keep running until the start of Q3, which is in about, 45 minutes from now. So you've still got another 45 minutes to decide. Who do you think will get pole as qualifying officially has begun in Miami? The first car on track is Sauber. I think the first 2 cars, actually, are the 2 Saubers. As the Williams there of Alex Albon trying to squeeze his way ahead of the Racing Bulls car, which he just about does, ahead of both Racing Bulls cars who are queued up there. And again, the reason they're doing this is because they're scared that it's going to rain. And obviously, you don't want to not have a good lap time if rain is on its way. But there you go. And let me just adjust the position of the timer so you guys can actually bloody see it. And there you go. So just under 17 minutes to go until the end of Q1. And in terms of lap time, the lap time to look out for today is, I think, a 125, a mid 125 is what I think pole position will be. But really, if you're going to be fighting for pole, you need to do a 1 minute 25 point whatever lap time. That will put you at least in contention. So that is what we need to look out for. If anyone gets into the 125s, they are looking very, very strong. As we're looking here at an Alpine starting the lap, as Albon has been noted for a pit lane infringement. He's getting all sorts of stewards' inquiries today. As we are looking at the Alpine of Pierre Gasly, who has started his first run in qualifying. And Alpine have been pretty slow this weekend, and I'd be amazed if both Alpines made it into Q2. I think Jack Doohan absolutely will get eliminated here in Q1. Doohan, I don't think has raced here before, plus the car is pretty slow. And to be honest, I'm not really sure why the Alpine is slow this weekend. Last year, at least in the race, the Alpine was quick from what I remember. But as well, this track, in terms of the corners, it is more so similar to Bahrain than the Jeddah circuit was a couple of weeks ago. So, obviously, if you remember, Pierre Gasly was and Alpine were incredibly quick in Bahrain. But this weekend they just don't have any pace at all. As Gasly goes third behind the two Saubers of Hulkenberg and Bortoleto, who have done 128s, which is pretty slow. And now Jack Doohan goes quickest on a 128.2, but again, pretty slow lap times. As Fernando Alonso now goes quickest on a 128.0. And Carlos Sainz was in second place until Alex Albon has now gone quickest on a 27.8. Carlos Sainz now in third place in the second Williams. And then you've got Doohan, Hulkenberg, Bortoleto, Gasly. And then Stroll in 8th place. As we've got Ocon now up to 6th. As Max Verstappen goes quickest onto a 127.5, but that is a pretty slow lap time for this part of qualifying, a 127.5. As Lewis Hamilton only goes 4th, half a second off the pace of Verstappen. The best time in this session really should be a mid 126 as Piastri does a 27.3 and goes quickest. Here comes Lando Norris, who goes third and 3.5 tenths off the pace. So Piastri to the top of the timesheets. And then Verstappen in second with Lando Norris in third. And then Albon, Alonso, Hamilton, Sainz, Doohan, Hulkenberg, and then Leclerc in P10. And then we've got Ocon, Bortoletto, Gasly, Behrman in 14th. And then Tsunoda 15th. And Stroll in 16th. So only 4 drivers have not done a lap time yet. And those are the 2 Racing Bulls drivers of Hadjar and Lawson, and the 2 Mercedes drivers of Russell and Antonelli. Sorry if I have to take long pauses, by the way, but I'm having a bit of a sneezing fit at the moment, which is not great. But we're looking at, I think this is Lando, or no, both McLarens coming back into the pits. I think McLaren will want to go back out again, though. As we now look at the 2 Mercedes who are queuing up at the end of the pit lane. They're on a different run plan, clearly, for this session. And hopefully should do a bit better lap times than what we've seen so far. Like I said, around a mid 126, I think should be the best time in Q1. And we are quite a number of tenths of a second away from that. And that's why Albon has been noted for an infringement, because he possibly overtook Hadjar in the pit lane, I think is what that is about. But we'll see what comes of that. As we're looking at Isaac Hadjar, who is just about to complete the first sector on his first qualifying lap. And it's a good first sector. Only half a tenth down on Piastri. And that pit lane infringement by Alex Albon, by the way, will be investigated after the session. So we'll see what comes of it. If they find him guilty, I doubt they'll give him a penalty for that. As here comes Hadjar up to the middle sector point, and only a tenth and a half off Piastri after the first 2 sectors. This is a lot more like it. And this should put Hadjar probably in the top 3 if he has a good final sector. As Isaac comes to the line. And he goes second. That's a brilliant lap by the Frenchman. So Isaac Hadjar up to second. And that lap time of a 1... I think as Alonso. No, not Alonso. Someone else has just improved a lap time. Yeah, that lap time of a 1:27.5 from Hadjar, that is, for Racing Bulls, pretty much as quick as you would have expected them to be in this part of the session. as Carlos Sainz now goes quickest. 1:27.0. That's a very good time from Carlos Sainz, but is beaten by Kimi Antonelli, who goes a couple hundredths of a second quicker, as George Russell's about to come to the line, but Russell is 0.3 down on Antonelli so far on his lap. But it's, Antonelli, Sainz, Piastri, and then Albon up to 4th. Where does Russell go? Russell only P7. Not very good of a lap. Nearly 0.4 off the pace of his teammate. Bortoleto has also improved massively. He's up to P5. And then you've got Lawson, with his first time, has gone up to 6th place. So some real good improvements out there. So Lawson 6th. And then as Yuki Tsunoda now goes up to 9th. George Russell obviously went 7th. And Leclerc has just improved, but only gone 9th. And Lewis Hamilton has just improved as well and only gone 15th. So Ferrari are in quite a bit of trouble with those lap times with both drivers. Hulkenberg is up to 8th. And then, Leclerc 9th. And then Tsunoda in P10. And then you've got Hadjar, Verstappen, Doohan, Norris and Hamilton on the cusp of the drop zone. And then in the drop zone, you've got Ocon, Alonso, Gasly, Stroll and Behrman. As Max Verstappen improves massively and does a 1:26.8, which is not great, but it's definitely easily good enough to get him through to the next part of qualifying. So Max Verstappen is now quickest. Piastri just improved as well, but he has remained, interestingly, in 2nd place. By the way, sorry if you heard that familiar noise of the battery getting low on a device. It came from somewhere in my room, but I honestly have no idea where that came from. So, I'll have to have a look to see what that was, but that was absolutely out of nowhere. But Verstappen quickest on a 1:26.8. That's a good lap time for this part of qualifying. Should get him through to the next part of qualifying. As Lewis Hamilton being wheeled back into the garage, he will need to go out again because he's only 0.008 of a second ahead of Ocon, who's in the drop zone. So Hamilton has got to get back out there and get a better lap on the board, or else he is in trouble. But with 3.5 minutes to go in Q1, it is Verstappen, Piastri, Antonelli, Sainz, Norris, and then Albon, Bortoleto, Lawson, Russell, and Hulkenberg. That is your top 10. And then the 5 drivers just below the drop zone: Leclerc, Tsunoda, Hadjar, Doohan, and Hamilton. Quite a headline group of cars. Obviously, 2 Ferraris, a Red Bull. So we will see what happens here. But we could see one of the Ferrari cars here end up eliminated in Q1. Because those 2 times that those 2 Ferraris did previously really was not good. As Russell, we're looking at coming through the first 3 corners on his new lap. Russell really needs to go quickest with this lap, I think, for his own confidence and for the team's confidence. Let's see what he can do. It's not a great first sector, quarter of a second off Max Verstappen. So already starting quite far off the pace. As Oliver Behrman, who's currently last, is also on a final flying lap. Both Haas's in the drop zone, which is quite a surprise to me. Surely there's a lot more pace there. As Russell fighting his car through the middle part of the lap and almost touches the wall on the exit of the final corner before the middle sector time beam. And yeah, this is going to put Russell in the top 5, but it's still going to be slower than Antonelli. Russell has definitely time to find. And it's not quite working out at the moment for Russell. And he does actually go ahead of Antonelli, but not by that much. So Russell up to 3rd. Both Mercedes should be fine now. Behrman only goes 19th. That is very disappointing from Oliver Behrman. Because like I said, there is definitely more pace in that car. So Behrman is out. Here is Leclerc, currently in 11th. Can he improve? Surely he can to drag his car into Q2. He only goes 9th. That's still not a great lap time. A 27.4. He's going to be right on the cusp, I feel. As Gasly goes 15th and puts Lewis Hamilton in the drop zone. Hamilton has not even started his final lap yet. He's about to. He's just let Hadjar through the final corner. Here comes Hadjar, who goes up to 6th. So Hadjar is all good. He is through. Here is Lewis Hamilton, though. Can he make it through? As Lance Stroll goes 18th. So Stroll and Behrman definitely out. And Stroll ahead of Alonso for the time being. Lewis Hamilton, handling the car has not looked great so far on this lap through the first sector, but his first sector time is good enough for the moment, as Alex Albon has improved and gone up to 4th place. Williams 4th and 6th in this session. Williams really do look strong. Watch out for them. They might be the dark horses in this session. As Hamilton, now the checkered flag has fallen. He's now down to 17th because Alonso has gone up to 15th. Can Hamilton get his way out of the drop zone? He's 4 tenths up on Alonso after the first 2 sectors. Surely he can. He just needs to execute properly this final corner, which he does. And he gets a good enough exit. And surely Lewis Hamilton is through, and he is, to Q2. Can Yuki Tsunoda get through? Yes, he can. Tsunoda goes up to 9th, just behind Lewis Hamilton. So Tsunoda in 9th. And who else have we got? Hulkenberger's dropped into the drop zone in 16th, and Esteban Ocon has got himself just about into the second part of qualifying. And also, I said for certain I felt that Jack Doohan was going to be knocked out in Q1, and Doohan has not only got through to Q2, Gasly's been eliminated in Q1. So Doohan has out-qualified Pierre Gasly, I think, for the first time this season. So congrats to Doohan, because that is a brilliant effort. But there you go, guys. That is Q1 over and done with. Let's go through your drivers that have made it through to Q2. Max Verstappen, Lando Norris, Oscar Piastri, George Russell, Alex Albon, Kimi Antonelli, Carlos Sainz, Lewis Hamilton, Yuki Tsunoda, Isaac Hadjar, Gabriel Bortoleto. Also, great job by him to outqualify Hulkenberg. Charles Leclerc, Jack Doohan, Liam Lawson, Esteban Ocon, and knocked out in Q1, Nico Hulkenberg, Fernando Alonso, Pierre Gasly, Lance Stroll, and Oliver Behrman. And yeah, great job as well, like I said, by Bortoleto in a Sauber car that does have some decent potential. So watch out for Bortoleto. Might cause, hold on, let me just hide that. He might cause a bit of a surprise in this second part of qualifying and end up with a good result. But let me get the second graphic ready. There you go. There is the second cutoff zone, where currently you've got Bortoleto, Leclerc, Doohan, Lawson, and Ocon. If it ends with those drivers in the drop zone at the end of the 15 minutes of Q2, then of course they'll be eliminated in those positions. And let me just quickly blow my nose. I'll be back with you guys in a second. Right, that should be better for now. But yeah, Hulkenberg should be disappointed to be eliminated in Q1, even though, yeah, the car is still not great. You know, he showed some good potential earlier on the weekend and failed to deliver it, unfortunately. Alonso and Stroll knocked out in Q1. I don't think you could really blame Fernando that much for it. I think the car is just genuinely that bad. I said earlier, I don't think the Aston Martin is actually that good. I just think the reason it was made to look good by Fernando in the sprint qualifying sprint race is because of Fernando Alonso, not because the car was actually competitive. And then Oliver Behrman absolutely should be disappointed with himself. He should be in Q2, no doubt. I know Esteban Ocon is a good midfield level driver, but Behrman has already shown that he can beat Ocon. So yeah, no excuses there. Behrman should be in Q2. But now we wait for Q2 to begin, which should be in a couple minutes. As Anthony Davidson on the Skypad is just looking at that Alex Albon pit lane incident. And to me, it looks like Albon is probably going to be just fine. As also looking at Max having a snap of oversteer at a couple of the corners. That Red Bull's still not comfortable to drive. Especially with the way it washes out to the outside of the track, because again, the front end just is not there like it is with the McLaren or the Mercedes. And yeah, they're just showing some further analysis from Q1. But I said it was going to be close with Haas, Sauber, and Aston Martin, and it was. And to a degree, Alpine as well. And yeah, it was. So, in terms of who was knocked out car wise, or team wise, rather, in Q1, not really a surprise at all. But again, Behrman, absolutely, I think, is the one who should be doing better. as Q2 has now begun. And we've got, I think that is Charles Leclerc coming out of the pit lane. Leclerc, of course, one of the only drivers to have taken pole position here in Miami. The only pole sitters ever here in Miami are Leclerc, Perez, and Verstappen. And one of the McLaren drivers add their name to that list today. We will see as the two McLaren drivers come out. And yeah, the best time in that session was a 1:26.8, which again, that was about 2 to 3 tenths of a second off the pace that I thought it would be in that session. So I'm looking for low 1:26s and maybe a late 1:25 in this session. So for the midfield runners, I think as long as, you know, if you're a Williams or a Racing Bulls or an Alpine or a Sauber or a Haas, if you can do a 1:26 point something, that should be just about enough to get you either in the top 10, or if you don't make the top 10, you'll be very close. So watch out for that. 1:26 is the key if you want to get through to Q3, the top 10 shootout in Vice City. As Max Verstappen, the world champion and man who has dominated this Grand Prix mostly in the last few years. Red Bull car looking absolutely brilliant through the first sector. Again, that is the strongest part of the track. Only gets worse for the Red Bull as the lap goes on. And I've just remembered that I forgot to sync the timer up because I just wasn't paying attention. Sorry about that, guys. I will sync it up in 30 seconds at the 12-minute mark. And we'll see what this lap time is like from Verstappen as he comes through turn 15 and 16, the very pedestrian part of the track that passes the actual motorway, or highway as they call it in America. And there you go, 12 minutes to go in Q2. As here comes Max Verstappen out the final corner. It's looked good, but how good is the lap time? It's a 1:26.6. Good, but not great. Again, I would be surprised if Max, for what he's shown so far, I'd still be surprised if he's on pole later. I really would. As Tsunoda goes second on a 27.1. Leclerc goes second now on a 26.9, which is, if Ferrari are running used tyres like they do at the start of Q2, that's actually a pretty good time from Leclerc. As Bortoleto now goes fourth. So Tsunoda third, Bortoleto fourth, and then Ocon in fifth, or was in fifth until Carlos Sainz went second. Lewis Hamilton goes just behind his teammate. But Carlos Sainz is second. And then Lewis Hamilton now in fourth. As we're looking at Liam Lawson, who's finally got points on the board in a car definitely different to what he thought would be the car that got him his first points of the year, as Lawson goes 8th. And here comes Albon, who goes ahead of Carlos Sainz just about and up to second. Williams have done some good times to start here in Q2. Oscar Piastri exits the final corner. Not done a purple sector so far, but still ends up going quickest with a 1:26.2. That is a lot more like it. And Lando Norris goes about a quarter of a second slower in second. But that lap time for Piastri, that is what, that's the type of lap time I was talking about. That we need to see in this session. As here comes Antonelli. What can he do to respond to that lap time? Goes third. And here comes Russell. What does he do? Only 11th. Awful lap time. 1:27.1. No chance of getting through with that. And I mean, literally no chance of getting through because he's in the drop zone with that. Awful lap. So Antonelli, third. Russell, 11th. Just ahead of Ocon, Doohan, Lawson, and Hadjar. Hadjar, I think, went off the track on a lap of his. That's why Hadjar is back in the pits. As Russell says on the radio, just no grip, don't know what's going on. Something that was commonly said by Mercedes drivers last year. No grip, don't understand why, but the car has been a lot better this year, but Russell has not been lagging behind like this. But yeah, Mercedes not looking as strong as maybe I predicted so far in the fight for pole position, but they're still looking competitive. As here is Leclerc, and I'm guessing, yeah, slightly grazing the wall on the exit at turn 17 or turn 16, 5 centimeters away from the wall, according to AWS. But the two Williamses really have banged out some great laps there. Albon has done a 1:26.8, and I think so has Carlos Sainz. Those lap times should be good enough to get at least one of the Williamses through. They will need to go back out again though, just to make sure they get through to Q3, because the cars in the drop zone are not that far away. Also, good job by Yuki Tsunoda being in the top 10. He's about half a second off his teammate Verstappen, which I still think is a respectable gap, given just how great Verstappen is and how much it is Verstappen's team. And really, that's all Tsunoda needs to do, is mainly just get into Q3. As Russell on the radio there, ordering his team to get him out as quickly as possible because he just has no confidence in the car. Might suffer because of that if they do that, because obviously the track ramping up and improving grip-wise all the time. There's all the drivers now in the pits, cooling down before these final laps in Q2, where we may get a couple surprises, because Ferrari are not that far ahead of the drop zone, and you just never know how it will eventually shake out. So we will see just what happens here. With Ferrari, if you're a Ferrari fan, you're going to hope that they're on used tyres and that they've done their lap times so far. But if they're not, Williams look like they're right on pace, if not quicker, which is quite incredible to say. But let's see what Ferrari can do with absolutely guaranteed fresh tyres for this final run, as I think the two Ferraris now come out onto track. That's pretty much every car coming out now, especially with the clouds gathering a bit. The track not coated in sunshine like it was at the start of qualifying. As Lewis Hamilton sat in the pit lane waiting for the queue to get their way out of the pit lane. And yeah, Lewis Hamilton is less than 0.2 of a second ahead of the drop zone. So Lewis Hamilton once again, like Leclerc as well, at risk of a possible surprise elimination. But if they were on, as they usually are, used tyres for the first run of Q2, then as long as they improve on these final laps, they should be fine. As looks like Oscar Piastri is going to stay in the pits, which I think he absolutely, actually, looking at the lap time, will get away with that. So that's a good benefit for Piastri if he does stay in the pits. Obviously saves a set of tyres. As we now look at Esteban Ocon in P12, beginning his final run in Q2. If he was to get this car into Q3, as well, I'm not sure he's going to anymore, with a big wiggle through turn 1 and turn 2, you'd think he was partying on the Miami Strip the way he came out of turn 1. But if he gets this car in Q3, what a performance that would be. Same, by the way, for Bortoleto. Gabriel Bortoleto currently, with 2.5 minutes to go in Q2, in the top 10. But yeah, Ocon, because of that mistake, did do a not so good first sector, but he's still going, still on it. And there are still possibilities of at least a decent grid position. And yeah, he is just about inside the time that Bortoleto has done for the first 2 sectors. If he has a good final sector, he might just put himself in the top 10. Here comes Esteban Ocon. Through the final corner, as Tsunoda goes up to 8th. Here is Ocon to the line. Who goes up to 9th? Could have been better without that wiggle at turn 1 and 2, but that's still a decent run from Ocon, even though he might still get eliminated. Here's Isaac Hadjar. Surely can get himself right in the mix. What can he do? Yes, he does. Puts himself 10th. Not sure that will get into Q3, but good lap nonetheless. Here is George Russell, currently 13th, has to, for his championship, get into Q3. Cannot afford to be stuck in traffic tomorrow. But the lap looking better than it was before. And yet he's 3.5 tenths up on Hadjar after the first 2 sectors. This will probably put Russell into the top 5 as Doohan on a lap and is close to Hadjar's time as Sainz goes ahead of Albon. Sorry, I had Antonelli in the wrong position there, but he's now in the right position as George Russell. Brilliant final sector and goes up to 3rd. Here's Jack Doohan. Stays in 14th. To be fair to him, that car is not good this weekend. So, hard luck. Liam Lawson, only 15th. Miles off his teammate. Awful performance there by Lawson. Where is Lewis Hamilton? shaking his head. Looks like he's not on a lap. Lewis Hamilton, I believe, is out in Q2. I told you he's having an awful weekend. Yes, he had the great sprint result, but it was helped by his team. He's been having, let's be honest, an awful season that just gets worse. 12th only. And here's why. Locked up at the final corner, and that costs you about a third of a second, if not more. What a disaster from Lewis Hamilton, who will line up 12th for tomorrow's Miami Grand Prix. Anyway, Q2 is over and done with. Let's go through the drivers that have made it through to the shootout. Oscar Piastri, Lando Norris, George Russell, Kimi Antonelli, Max Verstappen, Carlos Sainz, Alex Albon, Charles Leclerc, Yuki Tsunoda, and a brilliant drive, truly brilliant, from Esteban Ocon to put himself in the top 10, but then knocked out in Q2, Isaac Hadjar, Lewis Hamilton, Gabriel Bortoleto, Jack Doohan, and Liam Lawson. And yeah, if there was any of the top drivers likely to be eliminated in Q1 or Q2, given his performance plus the car's underwhelming performance, it was Lewis Hamilton, who also never goes well around this circuit. We've seen that ever since we came to this Grand Prix. Lewis Hamilton just is not quick around this track whatsoever. But yeah, Esteban Ocon, massive shout out to him. What a lap that was. Even though he made the mistake, he still got through. That is a top job by Ocon. Happy for Tsunoda as well to get his way in. Isaac Hadjar, even though he got knocked down 11, I still think that's a good lap. He's right in a good position still to score points tomorrow. So yeah, I still think that's a good lap from Hadjar. Hamilton 12th, absolutely awful. Bortoleto 13th, decent enough. At least he outqualified his teammate. Doohan 14th, nothing more than Doohan could have done. And Lawson, absolutely terrible in 15th. But Q3 is coming your way very, very soon. As I can see, we've got 164 watching. Let's try and get, guys, up to 50 likes or over 50 likes in these next few minutes. Be great if we could do that. But I think because there is a clear winner, I will finish up the poll in the chat, where I've asked you guys who will take pole position for the Miami Grand Prix. Miami Grand Prix, sorry, before my throat cut out. 421 votes, and 49% of you have gone for Oscar Piastri, 29% for Norris, 13% for Antonelli, and 8% for Russell. I'd have to agree. I think Piastri is the favourite here. Just want to read a couple comments quickly, though. Gaming Therapy says Hamilton needs to retire. He's mediocre in that car. Someone else should be in that seat. There were quite a few people. Originally, I thought it was actually a joke at first, but I think I realised that they were serious. But at this point, you may have to take some, take them seriously to an extent. That Carlos Sainz maybe should have been kept rather than replace with Lewis Hamilton. Because what Hamilton is doing in that car, you can't defend it. Yes, the car is not the best. It has issues. We know that. But it's your job as a driver to get around those issues and still deliver. That's not Lewis Hamilton delivering, is it? Looney Classic says, Lewis needs to retire now. He's embarrassing himself now. And as Rook says, yeah, Lewis was less than a tenth away from Leclerc, but at the end of the day, Leclerc made it in. Lewis did not. So that's what matters at the end of the day. Plus, if Lewis had made it through to, made it through to Q3, would Lewis have been that close to Leclerc in Q3? Probably not. So, as Lewis, there was just a quick slow-mo shot of him storming back into the paddock with his helmet on. And yeah, nothing that can be done. I think people just need to accept it. As I said in my last podcast after the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, a couple people really went in on me for saying it, but it's the truth. And the truth will progressively wash over all of us that Lewis Hamilton is past his prime. He is no longer the man. He's no longer that guy. And like I said, people just need to accept that now. But as I said, coming into qualifying ahead of Q3 here, if you could do a 1 minute 25 point whatever lap time, that really sets you up nicely to contend properly for pole position. So these first runs in Q3 are going to be very interesting to see if anyone can dip into the 125s. If Piastri does, and if he's, let's say, the only driver that does, that is a very strong assertion in the fight for pole. And sometimes your first effort at pole is your best effort, which is why both efforts matter so much. As there is Leclerc with his blue helmet coming out of the garage. Leclerc desperately needs to make sure he ends up ahead of Sainz, Albon, Tsunoda, and Ocon. Not sure he'll end up any further than that, though, because McLaren, Mercedes, and Verstappen and the Red Bull are just too quick. As I said, coming into this session, Ferrari just don't have good pace. And they were always going to struggle at this Grand Prix, especially with how important the front end is at this around this type of track. And Ferrari, like Red Bull, struggle with the front end of the car. So that's why they are where they're at. As what cars on track, which must mean Q3, has begun. And I will sync up the timer in 20 seconds so we can get into this showdown. And again, because of how hard it is to overtake here, pole position absolutely is important. And there you go. 11 minutes remain in qualifying. Who will be the king of the streets, at least for today? Will it be the world champion, who has a knack at delivering incredible qualifying laps as of late? Or will it be the expected McLarens? Or will we get the youngest pole sitter in F1 history today? Or in these next 10 minutes? We will see. As we're looking at Max Verstappen. And like I said a couple of minutes ago, if anyone can get into the 125s on this first run, that is a really big start. As here comes Max Verstappen, all on his lonesome into the final corner. Piastri a bit further behind now. Piastri has had a couple poles. The 2 poles he's had, he's converted comfortably into race wins. And here goes Max Verstappen. Can he get 2 poles in a row in Miami? This pole for his championship might be the most important of his season so far. As through the first sector where the Red Bull glides beautifully. He gets through that just fine. Swings the front end into turn 8. And the first sector is good, but is it good enough? As we're looking behind at Piastri, who's looked fine for the first sector. 0.2 of a second slower, though, Piastri in the first sector compared to Verstappen. But remember, the McLaren gets even quicker in the rest of the lap, where the Red Bull gets slower. So it's not over yet. That's Verstappen throwing his car about. As Ocon does the first lap time of Q3. Tsunoda goes slower than Ocon. As here comes Max Verstappen. Can he dip into the 125s? No, he can't. He does a 126.4, which is actually slower than what Piastri did in Q2. And talking of Piastri, here he comes. Can he get onto provisional pole? No, he can't. He is 0.17 of a second slower. But there is definitely more pace in that McLaren. Because like I said, Piastri did a 126.2 in Q2. Lando Norris now goes second. 0.003 of a second off the pace. The top 3 separated by 0.02 of a second. But yeah, McLaren have definitely got more pace to show. Alex Albon 4th, Carlos Sainz in 5th. Here comes Antonelli, who goes 4th, a 0.25 of a second off the pace of pole. George Russell, what can he do? Only 6th, behind Albon in the Williams. That's not a good effort at all. Russell, 4.5 off the pace of Antonelli as Leclerc is back in the pits. I have no idea what's happened there. There you go. That's why Russell lost so much time. He locked up into the final corner. And Lando Norris did the same and lost a load of time as well. So, yeah, McLaren absolutely have a lot more pace in that car than what they've shown. And Leclerc also did the same, but decided to come straight back in, which was the smart choice, I think, there. But at the moment, with 1 run to go, Max Verstappen is on provisional pole. But we know McLaren, with both drivers, can go definitely quite a bit quicker than the lap time that Max has set, which is a 126.492. Piastri did a 126.2 in Q2. So McLaren, they've still got it in their hands. They just need their 2 drivers, or at least one of them, to produce the lap in the final lap of qualifying, and they should then have pole position. But one thing they cannot do is allow Max Verstappen to take pole here, because with the difficulty of overtaking around this track, Verstappen would be quite likely to hang on and win. And if Max wins this race, my God, is that a big win for his championship. So this is a very important final qualifying lap coming up for both McLaren drivers. Have no doubt about that. As we've only got 5 minutes remaining. As we're looking at Max in the Red Bull garage, who looks like he's probably set to be released from the garage in the next probably 90 seconds or so. But George Russell as well needs to improve. And, if Antonelli's going to be quicker than him, fine. But Russell needs to at least be in P5 behind his teammate. Because he cannot afford to get stuck with those Williams cars. As out comes Max, Leclerc, Piastri, Norris. They're all now filtering back out onto track for the crucial final run of qualifying. Ocon and Tsunoda yet again are the first couple out on track, so they'll be the first probably to finish their lap. As they're just holding Antonelli a bit longer, which may give him a slight bit better grip on his final lap, running, a slight bit later than the others. But for Max, if Max can improve his lap by, say, 0.3 of a second or more, then really, I don't think you can ask any more of Max Verstappen. But again, if he was to get this pole position, boy, would that be a massive pole position in his season. As Verstappen just coming through the end of the middle sector. As here is Oscar Piastri on beginning the start of the middle sector. Just shows you how far apart the cars are on their outlaps. So Max will be the first to complete his final lap before the McLarens come round. And here comes Max Verstappen for his final attempt at securing pole position. As all into turn one, snap of oversteer. That Red Bull really in the slower corners, still giving Max trouble. As he comes through the high-speed corners of the first sector, and he kept it all together. He has. And he has somehow done a purple first sector, a couple hundredths of a second quicker than he went before. As we're now looking at Verstappen in the little box, so we're now looking on board at Lando Norris, who is only 0.003 of a second away at the moment from pole. As we'll find out Max Verstappen's middle sector in a moment. What's Lando Norris's first sector like? It is not as good as it was before for Lando, as Max is almost 0.2 up on his personal best. Max is doing absolutely everything he possibly could to get this pole, as Tsunoda has improved up to 5th place. That's a good lap from him. And Verstappen comes to the line and does a 1:26.2. That is a brilliant lap. But what about the others? As Esteban Ocon now goes 5th. Leclerc replaces him in P5. As Lando Norris has done a purple middle sector, Piastri 0.3 off. After the first two sectors, Piastri, I think, has thrown away the chance at pole. But what about Lando Norris, who won this Grand Prix last year? No, he just misses out by 600ths of a second. Oscar Piastri, can he do anything? No, he can't, even though he does a purple final sector. McLaren, yet again, have thrown away pole position. Let's just wait for these final laps as Carlos Sainz goes up to 4th for Williams. Can Mercedes get back ahead as Alex Albon goes 5th? So both Williamses have out-qualified both Ferraris as Antonelli goes 3rd. Ahead of Piastri. That is massive for tomorrow's race. What can Russell do? Russell goes 5th. Not too bad in the end. But there you go. Somehow, some way, it always seems to be that Max Verstappen ends up in P1. No matter the car, no matter the conditions, no matter the track. And yet again, Max Verstappen will be starting a Formula 1 Grand Prix on pole. And if he can hold on to win tomorrow, what a massive moment that will be for Max Verstappen's championship. And here's a replay, and Norris bumped the inside curb maybe a bit too hard, but I'm not sure if that did cost him pole. No, I'm not sure it did, to be honest. But yeah, both McLarens in the end did not produce good enough laps, even though I still think the McLaren is the quicker car. But Max, yet again, produced when it matters most, and that's why he is car number 1. And of course, one thing I forgot to say the whole stream is congratulations to Max Verstappen on the birth of a new child. And what a way to celebrate that news if he was to win tomorrow's race and along, with this pole position. But there you go, guys. That is it for qualifying in Miami. What a qualifying it's been. And again, somehow, Max Verstappen yet again on pole. Lando Norris 2nd, Kimi Antonelli 3rd. 3 different cars in the top 3 for tomorrow's Grand Prix. At least spices it up to a degree. Oscar Piastri, the championship leader, only 4th. That's massive. George Russell 5th. Carlos Sainz 6th. Albon 7th. I told you there was more in that Williams than what they showed. And they've out-qualified Ferrari. Well done to Williams. Honestly, what a session. Charles Leclerc 8th. 9th. Esteban Ocon. 10th. Yuki Tsunoda. Also, great job by Ocon. 9th in the Haas. That is just incredible. And then Hadjar 11th, Lewis Hamilton 12th, Bortoleto 13th, Doohan 14th, Lawson 15th, and then Hulkenberg, Alonso, Gasly, Stroll, and Behrman will round out your starting grid for tomorrow. And Todd's saying, and you didn't even put him on your poll. Shame, shame. I feel like every time I doubt the possibility that he could do it, he ends up doing it. So I think at this point, there's no point, leaving him off of a poll. But anyway, let me ask, who is your driver of the day for qualifying in Miami? My driver of the day is Max Verstappen. I'm going to go, for my options, I'm going to go Max Verstappen, Carlos Sainz, Kimi Antonelli, and I'll put Ocon in there, who deserves a mention as well. So there you go. Again, my driver of the day, Max Verstappen. But for McLaren, yes, they've lost the battle today, but there is a battle. The most important battle is to be fought tomorrow. As long as they beat Max tomorrow to the win, that's all that matters. But it's going to be hard because, again, it's so hard to overtake at this circuit. They're going to need something to go really quite wrong for Red Bull and for Max, like it did earlier in the sprint race. But if it doesn't, and he keeps it all together, how do you overtake and beat Verstappen tomorrow? Not sure you do. But Mercedes, I would like also to shout out. 3rd and 5th, that's a good result. And as long as they can get themselves onto the podium tomorrow, that would be a good weekend for them still. Championship-wise, though, you'd probably want Russell on the podium more than Antonelli to keep George Russell's championship hopes alive. But even though, I like Piastri and I know, I do rate Norris to a certain degree, these two McLaren drivers have got to get their act together in qualifying. The amount of times this season they have left the door wide open for others to exploit their scruffiness in Q3, not good enough. It absolutely is not good enough. The car is still the quickest. I have no doubt about that. But the two drivers just, again, inconsistent in qualifying. But luckily for them, there is a race tomorrow where they should have in clear air the fastest car. Whether they actually utilize that to actually win the race is another story. We will see. But yeah, tomorrow is a massive race between Max and the two McLarens, even though Piastri is behind Antonelli. If Piastri can get ahead of Antonelli straight away, that would be crucial for his Grand Prix. Max absolutely has to win. McLaren absolutely have to win. So it should be interesting to a degree, even though I don't think we're going to get a lot of overtaking whatsoever. And then Mercedes, maybe can capitalize from some, shenanigans. We'll have to see. Williams, as long as they maintain where they are on the grid, I think they'll be incredibly happy with that. Meanwhile, Ferrari, 8th and 12th on the grid. An absolute shit show from them. And if anyone still actually thought Ferrari had a championship opportunity this year, surely by now you don't think that anymore. But Looney Classic says Norris should easily win it tomorrow. We saw how much faster they are on the sprint. Again, should, but will he actually, deliver a race without mistakes and deliver the potential of the car? Not something that Lando's done very often this season. So he should win, but whether, again, he does is a different story. Hank says Max is lucky not having Piastri on the front row. Yeah, maybe. You could say that. Can Antonelli get a podium? Absolutely he can. He's been super quick all weekend. Plus that car, I think, has got enough pace as long as Antonelli's in, performing in top form like he has been. There is enough pace there to where he can, he can do it. But, right. Well, there's not been a lot of votes, but I think I'll finish up the poll anyway, because I'll be honest, I'm absolutely knackered from the day I've had. I've been awake, 16 hours now? But let me finish up this poll in the chat. Only 18 votes, but a clear winner. The driver of the day, Max Verstappen, 50% of the vote, and then Antonelli on 33%, Sainz on 16%, and no votes for Esteban Ocon. Again, a reminder, I will not be doing a race watch along tomorrow for the reasons I laid out earlier. One, because I just don't think this Grand Prix can produce a genuinely good race, and I just don't like the track at all, especially for racing. But secondly, I do have a very big week of university work coming up next week, so I need to recharge the batteries ahead of that big week, and not doing a stream tomorrow absolutely will help. But just so you know, again, I will be doing a race watch along again in 2 weeks for the next Grand Prix at Imola, where also that weekend I will be doing a qualifying watch along the day before. So both qualifying and race watch along will return in 2 weeks at the Emilia Romagna Grand Prix at Imola. Cannot wait for that Grand Prix, especially with all the upgrades coming for all the big teams. So yeah, that's the plan. So the next time you guys will hear from me will be on Monday, where I will be uploading my podcast, going through my thoughts of what happened in the Grand Prix. So if you want to hear my thoughts as to what happens in the race tomorrow, check out my podcast on Monday, where that podcast probably will be uploaded in the evening, as it usually is on Monday night. And then, you guys can check that out. And then there might be a video coming out between the Miami race this weekend and the next one at Imola, because, of course, there's a 2-week break. Not confirmed, not guaranteed, but there is a chance of a new video. Remember, though, once we get to Imola, Imola is the start of the next triple header. So there is still plenty of content coming your way regarding this 2025 Formula One season. Cheers for coming along to this stream. Thanks for newly subscribing, smashing the like button. Really does help the channel, so thank you for that. Make sure to check out my last recorded video, link below in the description, where I've asked you guys who is the favourite for the Drivers' Championship, where I go through all the title contenders and give my view as to who I think is the most likely and what the strengths and weaknesses are for each contender. So make sure to check that video out, which I uploaded a few days ago. But yeah, that is it for the streams for this Miami Grand Prix. Hope you guys enjoy the race tomorrow. Hopefully it's way better than I'm expecting it to be. I really do hope I'm proven wrong on that. We'll have to see. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoy the Grand Prix tomorrow, and in general enjoy your bank holiday weekend. And until the next time you guys hear from me, like I said, which will be the podcast on Monday, reviewing the events of tomorrow's Miami Grand Prix. Until then, guys, and until my next stream, which will be in 2 weeks' time covering qualifying at Imola. Until then, guys, it has been me, Chazza HD. Goodbye.